معناتها زوج بنته بيكون موجود هو الإمام الآن شوفوا إن شاء الله على العشاء. أنا بدي أبدأ الآن. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. الحمد لله رب العالمين، الصلاة والسلام على محمد النبي الأمين وعلى آله وصحبه ومن تبعه بإحسان إلى يوم الدين. الحمد لله على نعمة الإسلام وكفى بها نعمة. الحمد لله على نعمة القرآن. الحمد لله على رسالة محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم. وأصلي وأسلم وأبارك على النبي المبعوث رحمة للعالمين وعلى آله وصحبه ومن تبعه بإحسان إلى يوم الدين. اللهم واجعلنا منهم آمين. I was planning today to talk about Gaza and the Middle East, as we put in the Masjid newsletter, which comes out every Wednesday. But by Thursday night, I had to change the subject because there's a new development that you are aware of, the whole world is almost aware of. And inshallah, this evening we'll talk about a new reality in the Middle East. Now, when I say a new reality in the Middle East, I'm talking about an event that would change the part of the landscape in the Middle East. Entity in Palestine took over the West Bank from Jordan, took over Sinai from Egypt, and Gaza took over the Golan Heights from Syria, created a new reality that we're still suffering from until today. Similarly, in 1973, there was a war, as was described by the Jordanian Prime Minister. Later on, he said it was a war of tahrik, not a war of tahrir, meaning the objective of the war was to get some movement in the process that would lead to movement of the so-called peace process, which, as many of you, eventually led to the Camp David Agreement. There was also the Lebanese Civil War, which created a new reality in the Middle East. There was Oslo Agreement. So when we talk about a new reality, we are discussing a situation that took place and that it would impact the Middle East for years to come. As you can tell, some of the events that I mentioned have left their impact and still on the Middle East, and they will keep having this impact for years to come. So what is it that this new reality, and what's the cause of it? Some of you who have been hearing those lectures for the past almost 2 years know that the way things were between Iran and the Zionist entity in Palestine was basically the Israelis trying to contain Iran and to contain whatever is or could be threatening to them. So there was not a serious enmity between the two. For those who do not know the history, during the Iran-Iraq war, the Israelis were in Tehran. Although Imam Khomeini and the people were saying death to Israel, death to America, but the Israelis were in Tehran with US officials in Tehran dealing with the Ayatollahs. And if you have, if you want to read more, there is tons of material. Just go to Google and search Iran Gate, and you will see what was considered one of the major scandals at the time, that the US and Israel were supplying weapons to Iran at the time, although, as I said, Iran was just in the street shouting after Friday prayer, death to Israel, death to America. So that relationship over the years took different turns in this regard. But there was not really a serious enmity. There's a history for this, because from the time of Shah Iran, he has very, very good relationship with the Zionists. In fact, Turkey and Iran, Turkey being part of the NATO, and Iran being, quote unquote, the only Shiite, country among the Muslim world, they found naturally to ally themselves with those Zionists, which have changed after the Iranian revolution, but not to the point of what we see as slogans that come from people or from politicians. A very good example, and we have commented on this and had at least 2 talks about it, is what happened last year when there was bombing between the two. What had taken place is the Zionists were able to infiltrate Iran and kill a major figure in the Palestinian struggle, Haniya, Allah yarhamuh, in Tehran. And later on, we have seen other assassinations in Beirut. Before that, we have seen Qasem Soleimani's assassination. And Trump made it clear that the Qasem Soleimani's assassination was a plan that was between the US and the Israelis. And he said in the last minute, Netanyahu backed off, said, I'm not going to participate. And that's why Trump did not forget it for Netanyahu. We'll talk about some of the consequences that we see now that the Israelis are asking the Americans to come to the rescue. So at that time, Biden was the president. And Iran had to do something, so they did send some missiles, they did send some drones, and at the same time, the Israelis also had done same thing. Then Biden, behind the closed doors, talked to both of them, okay, just like children, you beat him, he beat you, you did this, let's just have, continue, go back to the status quo, to square one. And things went back as it was. And when Trump came in his second term, it was clear that orders came from Iran to Hezbollah to seize the support of Gaza. And that was an indication that they are saying to Trump that we can deliver, because they were hoping that this will be a new term in this regard. Now, we have seen this major development. This major development came after negotiation between the US, direct negotiation, and the Iranians on the nuclear program. And we have seen early on, when Trump came to the presidency, that he wanted to end the Gaza war, and he wanted to deal with Iran directly. And they met with the Iranians face to face, which got the Israelis to go berserk. Also, they met with Hamas face to face, which the Israelis could not stomach either. So what had changed to the point that there was some kind of mutual agreement between the Israelis and the US government for the Israelis to do what they have done Thursday night and for the Iranians to respond. To talk about this, I need to give a quick background on the nuclear program of Iran. Now, Iran is a country that has about 100 million people. And Iran, they think of themselves as an extension to the old Persian Empire, but with Islam as the new factor in there. So they think that we have a long history. We are a nation that deserves to have its place in the area, not necessarily in the world, but to dominate in the Middle East. Especially that the Shah of Iran was the shurti. He was the cop of the Middle East, that he was really dominating the Middle East. Iran was, at that point, the main force in this regard. if we put, Turkey on the side as being a member of NATO. So the Iranians looked at Pakistan having this nuclear program in this regard, saying, why not us? So Iran has tried a nuclear program from the time of Shah Iran. And Germany have built 2 nuclear reactors in Iran. Now, those 2 nuclear reactors were being built when the Iranian Revolution happened in 1979. So Germany pulled out, and the reactors were not completed. Now, at one point in the 90s, there was this discussion of what to do with Iran, since Iran insists that they need to have a nuclear program. So the Council on Foreign Relations, of course, on behalf of the US government, initiate a study headed by Zbigniew Brzezinski, who was the National Security Advisor for President Carter. And the conclusion of the report, which I have read maybe 20 plus years ago, says that we should allow Iran to have a peaceful nuclear program. And the US have started this new policy of giving green light for Iran to have a nuclear program. As a result, Russia came and completed one of the reactors that the Germans have started. So Iran have one operating a nuclear reactor. It's a big plant just to produce power, just like Harris, which is 10 miles south of the masjid when you go on one south in this regard. Similarly, the US gave green light to United Arab Emirates to have a nuclear program. So they bought 4 reactors from Korea in this regard. So those are the 2 countries now in the area that have nuclear program, supposedly peaceful nuclear program. The story of China, Russia, the US, and India and Pakistan is separate. We have discussed it before. I'm not going to repeat it here. Now, Iran start doing what's called enrichment. Enrichment is, Allah, the way that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala put uranium in the ground, just like gold and silver. There's plenty of uranium in many places, especially in Niger and in Africa, where only less than 1% of the atoms of the uranium that is natural can split and produce the reaction that's needed in a nuclear reactor. Or, if it's too pure, in a nuclear bomb. So Iran start enriching, and they announced about 2.5 years ago or so that they reached 60% of enrichment, which is basically, getting close to a 90% plus or minus, which would be good for bombs. There was alarming situation at the time when they made this announcement. But there was a background for this too, because there was an agreement between the US, Europe, and Israel, and Iran, to have a limitation on the enrichment and a limitation on the nuclear program. And that worked for a while, during the time of Obama. And Netanyahu went crazy on this, tried to convince the Republicans to stand and the Democrats to stand against it. And some of you remember that part. So when Trump came, he canceled this program. And he canceled this agreement. And he said the US is out of this agreement. Iran used this opportunity that there's no agreement and start going on a high speed to enrich uranium. At one point went from 20%, suddenly they are at 60%. And of course, when a country said we have it at 60%, under the rug that they already got to 80%. I mean, that's a good assumption to make in this regard. So the Israelis, as I said, all along, there was not really a real enmity or conflict with Iran in this regard. Now it got to a point where the Israelis are saying, okay, this thing is threatening to our existence, because basically the Israeli mentality doctrine is that no country in the Middle East should have nuclear weapons except us. Of course, they do not put it this way, but they said no country in the Middle East should have nuclear weapons, period. But really, what it means, except us, because they do have it. The French gave them a nuclear reactor in the 1960s, and they stole tons of uranium at the time, and they have been running this demona and enriching all along. At one point or another, the Israelis kept asking the US to bomb Iran. Netanyahu, for the last 30 years, whenever a president comes, he will go, we need to bomb Iran together. We need to bomb Iran. We need to bomb Iran. And nobody even, gave him much of an attention, because the US does not want to be, quote unquote, used by the Israelis for their own purpose. When Trump came and he said that he want to deal with this peacefully, although he's the one who, as I said, pulled out of the agreement that was there between the US, Europe, and Iran, the Israelis did not like it. And there was, even behind the back of Trump, attempts to try to change this. I mean, they said that the Israelis were dealing, including Netanyahu, with the chief or the national security advisor, who is very hawk on Iran, to the point that when Trump realized it, he moved him and put him where? At the UN. But Trump insisted, I'm going to have a solution. And he kept saying, we are close to an agreement, we are close to an agreement. And he put, saying, by middle of June, we should have an agreement. And in fact, there was no agreement. Although Trump, as you have seen from before, when he talks about Ukraine and Russia, when he talks about Gaza, when he talks about any issue, he gives you the impression that he can solve it in 24 hours. I can do it. He's saying now I can solve the problem between the Israelis and Iran, just I did with Pakistan and India. Although that, to take a credit for that is ridiculous, because the situation is totally different. At one point, Netanyahu came to the US with a plan. What is this plan? That we can bomb Iran and destroy some of their nuclear capabilities, because they know that they cannot destroy the whole capabilities. The US is the only country in the world that have bombs that are so heavy that they can penetrate 6-7 stories in the ground. And the Israelis have asked for them, US will not give it to them. The maximum that they gave them so far as I know, is 2,000 pounds bombs that they have used in Gaza frequently, and we have seen the damage. So the US have those bombs, and that's why the Israelis kept asking the US to get with them involved, and they know basically that US did not give up on Iran. The only president of Iran who have enmity to the US was Ahmadinejad. The rest of them really were willing to walk all the way with the US. And you could just go back and see their statement in this regard. Ahmadinejad was really against the US. The rest of the president, with the approval of the main Ayatollah, did not have that attitude. They were willing to, work out something along these lines. But when Netanyahu came to the US, he came with a plan, comprehensive plan, that we have enough spies inside Iran. We have technology inside Iran. We have military components inside Iran. We have what it takes inside Iran to take out two things. One is the top leadership of the army and the nuclear scientists. That we have what it takes. We can take them out. And in fact, they did in 10 minutes. We'll talk about this. And then the second thing is that we can disable the anti-aircraft missiles that the Iranians have with drones they have the drones inside Iran. Now, somebody would say, how could this be the case? How could the, Israelis have all this influence within Iran? That's a long story. And we cannot really discuss it in detail, but all what I can say in this regard is that Iran has been infiltrated by the Israeli intelligence for so many years. So many years. Let me just quote to you one thing that Ahmadinejad, who's the president of Iran, at one point mentioned. He said that the country is deeply penetrated by the Israeli spies. And he said, I'll talk about a case which was in the media, by the way. This is not private information. It was in the media for those who followed it. And in fact, the Turkish news have put it again, a reproduction of it yesterday. So he said that the government of Iran decided that there are too many Israeli spies in Iran. And they need to find them and get rid of them, whatever that means. And he said that they hired one of their officials and assigned him to target the Israeli spies. He said the disaster was this guy was an Israeli spy. I mean, imagine how incompetent is the system there. That the person who's supposed to discover the Israeli spies was an Israeli spy. And furthermore, he had 18 spies under him. They were able to steal the nuclear secrets and send it to the Israelis. And they, of course, played a role in disabling the centrifuge, which is machines to enrichment and so on and so forth. So when Netanyahu came with this plan, I mean, that sounded to be, this is a go. The U.S. is not participating. Of course, it's U.S. planes, it's U.S. bombs, but the U.S. is not directly participating in this. And and I know, any country that have those F-15s and F-35s and what have you, they cannot use them except by a permission of the U.S. This applies to Israel and applies to the rest. If they come and say you cannot use them, in this case, they cannot. That's the agreement that they would have. Same thing applied to the Koreans. Same thing applied to the Saudis and what have you in this regard. So Thursday night, in about 10 minutes, the Israelis were able to take out the top leadership of the army, the Revolutionary Guard, and about 9 top nuclear scientists. Some of them maybe that night, and maybe 3 or 4 after that. And that was a disaster. There's no doubt about it. I mean, a disaster with, you cannot put a measure on it. How in the world a country that has been hearing different signals from Trump and Netanyahu in the past 2 weeks, they may hit any time. No, I asked them not to hit, but I do not know, they may hit. I mean, all this was in the media. You were following it, I was following it in this regard. But we are people that we just read the news, analyze it, try to understand it. But a country like Tehran, Iran, with all these capabilities that they have, how in the world you can kill the chief of staff of the army? This is the highest person in the army. And you kill the highest person in the Revolutionary Guard. And you kill the head of mukhabarat, intelligence of the army and the country, and the other intelligence of the Revolutionary Guards. And then you kill another 4 of the top echelon of the military establishment in 10 minutes. How? Well, bulk of it was done on the ground, not from the planes, believe it or not. Those were spies on the ground, and I guess when the U.S. saw this plan, regardless if there was an intervention or a help from others, that's not clear. But what we know, and the videos are there, and the precision that this thing was done, and Iran within few minutes admitted that 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 were killed, and as of yesterday, 20 top military officials and nuclear scientists were assassinated. How? It just tells us that the Mossad, over all those years, the Israeli intelligence have penetrated Iran. They have two well-known techniques: money and women. I mean, they used it before in Arab countries. They used it when they killed Mashhad, Allah yarhamu, the Egyptian scientist who was working in Iraq. And there's a long list of assassination, the Palestinian leadership over the years and so on and so forth. But this degree of penetration is really shocking. Now, let's put this behind us and get to the real stuff. So, Friday night, when this damages happened, we had President Trump saying to Iran, look, save yourselves. Let's just save yourselves, accept what had taken place. Otherwise, if the Israelis keep at it, nothing will be left in Iran. This is the mentality of a businessman who have in his business, he lost part of the business and say, let me try to rescue whatever's left. That's not how nations think. It's not how countries behave. This is not how people respond to such things. I mean, this was a major insult to the Iranian government, no doubt about it. It's worse than the killing of the top leadership of Hezbollah and some of the top leadership in Hamas and this and that, with the knowledge of the Iranians in this regard, and since some of them supposedly have all those techniques and intelligence and all those things. So of course, Iran, you would expect a response, but what level of response? I mean, there's no response that can measure to what had took place of the damage on Thursday night. So Friday evening, there was some missiles and some drones going, which was really not something significant in this regard. So basically, you have seen the Zionists and their supporters around the world saying basically, this is a big achievement, and the Israelis are, King Netanyahu, and you have seen all of this. Then came the second night, which was devastating for the Zionists in Palestine and their supporters around the world. Because for the first time, you can see images. If you look at it, say, oh, this is from Gaza. No, this is from Tel Aviv. Oh, this is from Rafah. No, this is from Haifa. Oh, this is from... No, these things, subhanAllah. It's very interesting that last week, in the Israeli press, they said that the majority of the Israeli citizens, they said that they do not want to see any images from Gaza. Did you hear this? The majority of the Israeli citizens, they said that they do not want to see any new images from Gaza. And what happened? Those images came to Tel Aviv and Haifa and the south and the north and different areas. إن في ذلك لعبرة. There is, a lesson in all of this. Now, Iran and Iraq fought 8 years of war. They did not have shelters. But they had the patience and the resources for 8 years to fight in this regard. And we have seen in Gaza, it has been 2 years, and the fighting is still ongoing in this regard. So how long can the Zionists maintain their composure with this? I would say a few more days. They cannot sustain it for weeks. Imagine the US ambassador, this is an evangelical Zionist, who went to Palestine without any shame, saying if there is a need for a Palestinian state, let it be outside Palestine. What? You want to establish a Palestinian state where? On the moon? Or close by? And who are you? Remember the previous ambassador during the time of the Trump administration, Friedman, he was living in a settlement. How? A US ambassador would live in a settlement. So the US ambassador, this Huckabee guy, he said yesterday, I had to go to the shelter 5 times in one day. Okay, what do you expect? I mean, you are not in Las Vegas, right? You are not entertaining yourself in a US, vacation destination. You are in the Middle East. And Al-Badi Adlam, the one who started with the oppression, is more of an oppressor. So whether they did or did not expect a response or the response, that's something that at least the president himself gave the impression initially that, we can work things out. In fact, it was ridiculous. I mean, listen to this. So after the first wave of hitting Iran, the president of the US came in the morning, said, we are meeting with the Iranians on Sunday to discuss the nuclear program. I mean, what to make of this? I mean, this is someone, you cannot be serious. You cannot be serious because the Israelis destroyed some of the research reactor part, some of the enrichment part in this regard, and as I said, did destroy also the some of the missile launchers initially through drones that they were smuggled inside Iran. So the response came, as I said, the second day, which was much stronger than the first day, and the shock waves went through the Zionists and their supporters around the world. How could this happen in Israel? How could this happen in Israel? It's as if this is only reserved for Muslims. Yeah, Beirut can be destroyed totally. Gaza can be destroyed totally. Libya can be destroyed totally. Syria can be destroyed totally. Iraq, Afghanistan can be destroyed totally. But no, this thing does not happen in Israel. You remember the shock when Russia attacked Ukraine? This is not supposed to happen to Europe. This is supposed to happen somewhere else. And you know what they mean in this regard. So this basically gave, as I said, a shock wave to the Zionists and their supporters around the world. Now, there's something that still the Israelis did not mention or try to do, which is, as we mentioned earlier, the Russians have completed a big nuclear plant in Iran. Because what they have done until now, it was basically equipment underground. So there were no radiation release to the outside world, to the environment. But if they are to bomb the Bushehr, nuclear plant, which is only 15 miles from the Emirates. You remember Chernobyl, and you remember the Japanese reactors. This could contaminate the water in the area for many, many years to come. This could kill some people on a short term and kill many with cancer and other illnesses on the long term. So until now, that plant is safe. Russia did not try to bomb Ukraine nuclear plants, one of the largest is Zaporizhzhia. The Russians took over that, which has, I think, have 6 reactors. It's one of the largest in the world. Because basically, if you do something like this, it would eventually impact them. Depends on the direction of the wind. And if you have seen the Prime Minister of Qatar discussing, he said basically we do not have rivers, we do not have much of water. This is how we do salination. They do go through the process of salination, which is to change the water of the Gulf or the seas or what have you to water that they can drink. To what extent this thing would go remain to be seen. Now, question: did the Israelis destroy the nuclear program in Iran? The answer is no. The answer is no. When a country starts on a program, and they have been going on this program for many, many years, they have the know-how. Yeah, they killed part of their scientists, but those things you cannot just take it out totally. The country can rebuild. Secondly, many of the equipment of the program and the enrichment are way underground, under a mountain, so they could not reach it, except if the U.S. interfere and use those, bunker busters that they can really destroy this. Where this thing is going, of course, Iran said we are not going to go to the negotiation on the nuclear program. Because again, this is not how nations think. It's not how nations see things, as the president have suggested. However, there are indications, and again, put lines under indication, that the Iranians and the Israelis do not want this to go long. Take, for example, the president of Cyprus. He said that I passed messages from Iran to the Israelis. Take what the US, we have heard from them. Basically, Trump said today, let them fight it, and then I can, play a role. Maybe Vladimir Putin can play the role, and we can have, an agreement, a ceasefire in this regard. So there are indications to that effect. Yes, you will hear, for example, some of the Iranian officials saying, any country that would support the Israelis will consider them part of this, and we will bomb and this and that. Absolute, utter nonsense. I mean, they know that Jordan is being used as a base to stop some of those missiles and drones. And most likely it is the American in Jordan who are doing this, because the Americans have the equipment in Jordan. And maybe Jordan is doing part of the work to show their loyalty to their buddies in Tel Aviv. That's not something that would be strange in this regard. But remember, a week before Thursday night, a high-ranking military official in Tehran threatened the American bases in the Gulf. And that was top stupidity. Top stupidity. If you are not gonna do it, why make such a statement? And you know that you cannot do it. You know that you cannot do it. Because if you're gonna do it, I mean, Trump is Trump. I mean, he would need, if they are, facing the people in the U.S. streets and sending the National Guards in the U.S. streets and sending the, basically the people from the Marines to the U.S. streets, what do you expect for them to see their bases being bombed in Qatar and in Kuwait, and saying, okay, we can have an agreement. So again, that was the stupidest. And Trump already said, this guy is dead. He was among those who were assassinated. And when they asked him about negotiation, after his initial statement that we're going to meet on Sunday, which was ridiculous, he said the people we were discussing with, they died. And the media said, how? He said, well, they did not die by corona or by illness. You know how they died. Basically, they were assassinated in this regard. So the Israelis are trying their best in this regard to do what? Get the U.S. involved. And so far, the U.S. is saying, no, we are not gonna be part of this. However, we will defend Israel. You see, this is, because this, you have to take this as something that for many years to come, I'm not sure how many years, that this will be the reality. And it's consistent, really, confirm what the Quran said. When the Quran talked about, those people, he said they only will have, a say. They only will have, what might also be called an entity or a power or prestige, only through two things: support either from Allah or from the people. إِلَّا بِحَبْلٍ مِّنَ اللَّهِ وَحَبْلٍ مِّنَ النَّاسِ. Allah will not give them their habl, His support. They already defy Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala when they did not accept Isa alayhi salam as a prophet of Allah. From that point on, before that they were the only people who worshipped Allah on earth, and the Quran have talked about this. But after Isa alayhi salam, they defy Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So from that point on, there's not the support of Allah, but there's the support of the people. So under the Islamic State, they have their golden years. For 1400 years, they live among Muslims, they have their golden years, and many of the Jews have written on this history in Spain and beyond. And in the beginning of this century, after what had happened in the 18th, of the last century, we find the British adopted them. Before that, the French tried to adopt them and use them to have a base in Palestine. And when the British became very weak after World War II, they gave the mantle to the US, and the US took this. That's why Macron said, we will defend Israel. Because, as of 2 weeks ago, the Israelis were telling Macron and the US ambassador to that effect, attacking him for talking about establishing a Palestinian state. And some of those officials said, why don't you establish a Palestinian state in the French Riviera in this regard? And they called explicitly Netanyahu and his, gang called Macron, he's on the side of Hamas, which is, of course, absolutely ridiculous in this regard. But now, France comes and says, we will help to defend Israel. See, defend. Because the Europeans and the US, there is this commitment that for now, they will stand behind this Zionist entity in Palestine. Until further notice. So this habl min al-nas that Allah mentioned in the Quran, they only can sustain themselves when others can help. They cannot do it by themselves. And you have seen Netanyahu and company rushing to the US, help. After October 7, rushing to the US, telephone, we need your help, we need your support. In the last 2 days, they are talking to the US, we need the US to help, we need the US to interfere. We need. إِلَّا بِحَبْلٍ مِّنَ اللَّهِ وَحَبْلٍ مِّنَ النَّاسِ. So that's the way that things will be for a while. Until the price of keeping this Zionist entity become too high. At that point, they will be sold out. That's one of the ways where a major change will happen to the area and will be, forced on them to come out with a certain scenario or a certain formula or a certain solution. Because for how long the US will keep, giving all those billions of dollars for that cause. We have seen, so the closest advisor to Netanyahu, this guy Damer, who is at one point was the Israeli ambassador to the US. He kept talking about how fancy life in occupied Palestine is for the Jews, and how he have this imagination that all the young Jews will start going to Israel to enjoy this life and enjoy this thing. What happened is his own mother and her family packed their bags and they left Israel. His own family. Because all of this Zionist dream, those guys are willing to sacrifice the young Jews for their political agenda. Why in the world? Why in the world they put all those people in that situation? Some of the reasonable and balanced Jews will tell you basically we are being used by the US and the West in Palestine for their own purpose in this regard. But the political establishment give a different picture. I'll give you another example. The evangelical Christians, what's their belief? Their belief is that the US and Europe should support Israel, make it much, much stronger, so that Isa alayhi salam will come back. To do what? When Isa alayhi salam come back, they will go to the Jews in Palestine saying, either you become Christians or we'll slaughter you. That's their belief. And the BBS ran a program, in fact, public TV ran a program, very interesting program on this issue. They had interviews with people, politicians and thinkers who are reasonable, reasonable Jews in Palestine, and they were saying, we do not want those evangelical Christians. They said their aqidah, their way is eventually to tell us you become Christians or we'll slaughter you. We do not want their money or their support. That's the reasonable ones. But Netanyahu and company, no, they said, those are our main supporters. To the point that now within the Israeli establishment, there are those who are starting this blame game and saying that the Netanyahu government have worked closely with those evangelical Christians and neglecting close relation with the US Jews in this regard. Because basically, this whole thing has nothing to do with Judaism as a deen, as a religion. This is a political agenda that aims at superiority in the area. And you have seen Smotrich and Nagfer and company. I mean, some of them are saying basically, look, Lebanon is part of Israel. Syria is part of Israel. Part of Egypt is part of Israel, and we will have also part of Iraq. We have to get to the Euphrates River. I mean, some of those people are in power. And when Smotrich went and gave a talk in Europe, if you saw the map that they put for Israel, there was no Jordan. It's by default, Jordan is part of us, and so on and so forth. This is what also the Quran talk about, that this ulu, وَلَتَعْلُنَّ عُلُوًّا كَبِيرًا, that there will be this time, and for those who study history, for about 2,000 years, the Jews did not have any serious political entity in the world to count. So when the Quran talk about وَلَتَعْلُنَّ عُلُوًّا كَبِيرًا, that you will have a situation where you will be flying high with so much power, money, that you will be basically so arrogant with this ulu. And it's not just ulu, kabir. So you will be in a status where you look at others from way above. Isn't this what's happening in our area, the ulu al-kabir? where the Israelis have bombed in the last only few weeks. Lebanon, bombed Syria, bombed Gaza, bombed the West Bank, bombed Yemen, and Thursday night bombed Iran. So basically, this political entity, again, which has nothing to do with Judaism as a religion, it's a tool that they use, is behaving as if I'm not going to allow anyone in this vicinity to challenge me. That we will be the superior power. We will not allow any country to have weapons to match our weapons. I mean, imagine, Saudi has signed a deal to buy $150 billion of weapons. I'm not sure for what. I mean, they have been buying tens of thousands, or I should say, tens of billions of dollars over the years. And, those weapons cannot do anything in Yemen. I mean, they ran a war in Yemen for 5 years. Who was fighting? The Sudanese and the Moroccans and others. In fact, it was a Moroccan F-16 that was brought down by the Yemenis. But even that those weapons do not have much of work, the Israelis insist in the Congress that the Saudis should not get the technology in those planes. So the planes, it's the same plane, the one that the US uses. But it does not have, when it's sold to the Israelis, different than the one that's sold to the Saudis. And that's what the conflicts with also with Turkey, because Turkey wants to have the whole package. We are a member of NATO in this regard. So this mentality of superiority, العلو, that's there. This has been their policy all along. Now, once in a while, they look to be willing to compromise. But this is only, a deception. Oslo was a good example. When Oslo happened, unfortunately, we had some people around the Middle East saying, there's this road toward a Palestinian entity, although there was no promise in Oslo that a Palestinian state will be established. They were signed on a piece of paper, white paper. The only thing that the Israeli committed to is to recognize the PLO as representing the Palestinian people, period. The rest of the things are to be discussed and negotiated, and we know what had happened so far. They got nothing. So anyone who really think of that there would be a change of the mentality among those Zionists, they do not understand the reality. They do not understand the reality. Even with this Abrahamic faith, so-called Abrahamic faith, that came where some of those Muslim countries, unfortunately, came to the table, some of them having this warm peace to the point that they are supporting the Israelis with food and supplies during the war. I mean, imagine 2.5 million people cannot find anything to eat. And 57 Muslim countries, they cannot get a gallon of milk to Gaza. A gallon of milk. We are not talking about a truck. A gallon of milk to the children of Gaza, 1 gallon. They cannot get it without the Israeli agreement. What had happened? Because there is this ummah that have changed. We have seen Turkey seeing the situation in Syria and the Israelis bombing Syria day and night in different parts of Syria. Turkey saying, alluding, want to establish a military base in Syria. And the Zionists came, no, that will not be accepted. That will not be an option. And that's what brought Netanyahu to Washington when Trump told him to come. He said, your disagreements with Erdogan need to be solved. Erdogan is my friend. I like him and he likes me. I mean, he said it in public. Because the normal thing for this ummah of having some izzah is for Turkey to sign a defense agreement with Syria. They signed a defense agreement with Qatar. You remember when the Saudis and the Emirati went to invade Qatar? You remember those days? So the Qatar realized that neither the US nor Britain will come to their defense. So they have communicated and agreed with Turkey to have a defense pact. Within 24 hours, the Turkish parliament approved it, and the Turkish tanks were rolling in Doha. Why not? Having an agreement, this is not threatening to the Zionists or anybody else. Syria is a country that needs to be established from even below scratch. They are not even scratch country. But the Zionists have this mentality that we do not want 50 years from today there will be a threat in Syria. We do not want 25 years from now, today, a threat from the Gaza, and so on and so forth. If you are with this mentality, it means one thing, that they only, and I'll close with this, that they only will be satisfied when this ummah does sujood, not ruku' even. They do not want you to prostrate to Allah only. They want you to prostrate to them, that you give up, that this ummah will just give up. Yeah, you want Palestine? Yeah, it's yours. And you know, it's your ihsan and your goodness if you let the Palestinians live there, please. That's what they want. And what they really suffer is that the people of Palestine, after 75 years, after lots of suffering, there's only a few sellouts who have sold the cause, the bulk of the Palestinians. And you have seen, people are dancing in Gaza, people are dancing in the West Bank, people are dancing in Lebanon. Why? Why? Because they have been hammered and beaten by those Zionists day in, day out. So when they see them hit with, you know, a fist in the eye, people are dancing in the streets in this regard. And that's the issue, that those countries, the people in the world, the people in the Middle East, not just to accept Israel as a normal entity in the area, but to submit to it. And as one Israeli author said yesterday, that the Arabs, listen to this, the Arabs need to pay the jizya to Israel. I mean, you know, what's more than this? For those who do not know what's jizya, in Islam, the Muslims pay zakah. Non-Muslims, for protection, because they are not required to pay zakah or be in the Islamic army in this regard, they pay a jizya, amount of money per month. And if they get old and they do not have the money, the state would need to support them. That's the concept of jizya. So he's saying now it's not us, the Jews, that need to pay the jizya to the ummah. It's this Arab that need the jizya to the Israelis. May Allah bring the khair and the good for the ummah. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala have mercy on the shuhada. And may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala show us his ayat and those who do not want any khair for this ummah. We have 5 minutes, inshallah, for question, comments, inshallah. 5 minutes. Yes, any question, any comment? The salah is, the iqamah is at 10:10. Good question. What will be happening? The fact is, as the brother mentioned, that the Israelis have air superiority and they have their network of spies inside Iran. Well, they had air superiority in Gaza, right? They have air superiority in Gaza. They had total control of Gaza. I know there's no comparison. I'm just giving you, bear with me. And they had control over the whole borders of Gaza. And whenever we have Abu Hamza coming, or Abu Ubaidah coming, said, oh, those people are still alive? So basically, yes, air superiority is a major issue in this regard. But if Iran can manage 10 missiles per day to Tel Aviv and Haifa and Jaffa, the Israelis cannot sustain it. The borders are closed, the airport is closed, the markets, the companies, the people, how can they live? Yeah, Iran lived for a war for 8 years. Iraq for 8 years. People of Gaza, they have been there for 2 years in this regard. The Israeli, the Quran said, وَلَتَجِدَنَّهُمْ أَحْرَصَ النَّاسِ عَلَى حَيَاةٍ. So if you are that, attached to the goodies of the dunya, of course, wait until the borders are open and the airport is open and see the reservation for those people who are leaving. Many of the people who went to Palestine, they lived, one of them put it clearly. He said, look, I have house subsidy. I live in the West Bank, clean air. I do not need to deal with those factories. And many of them are like this. Yes, there are few Zionists. And the worst among them are the American Zionists who went to Palestine. But Israel cannot sustain life like this. If you have few missiles per day, but now when we have 30 and 40 missiles by day and the people are in the shelters, how long can they sustain it? I mean, you can still see a big difference between their attitude toward Netanyahu Friday morning and now. Because Friday morning, you did it, you this, and the Iranians, if they respond, they'll be mute. Well, they have seen the response. And so far, the Iranians themselves, by the way, are saying this is not a real response. The real response is coming. I'm not sure what is it, alaykum salam. What is it that they have, but they see whatever they have done so far, they did not even do 10% from the damage that they got from the Zionists on the first night. Subhanakallahumma bihamdik, nashhadu an la ilaha illa anta, nastaghfiruka wa natubu ilayk. Jazakumullah.